دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء قسما بالله رب العالمين ما ارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار ظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Finding Me and the ITV Networks. Today again with my very special guest, and I think perhaps one of the most profound individuals of our time, Professor Ramon Grosfoguel, who is a lecturer, professor at the University of Berkeley in the United States. Professor Grosfoguel has spent much time traveling the world, raising discussions on Islamophobia, on decolonial thought, decolonization, and has, and I think perhaps opened the minds of many scholars, especially in South Africa, about the importance of a decolonial narrative. He's again here in South Africa at the UNISA Summer School, and we thank UNISA for this opportunity to spend some time with this amazing professor. With that, thank you very much for sharing your time again with me, Professor.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be back.
I'm glad, alhamdulillah, and I think the good news is that you will be back again to do the summer school for UNISA, but you will be also introducing a critical Islamic studies decolonial chapter, which you host in Grenada. You will be possibly bringing this to South Africa as well?
Yes, this is one of the plans to basically bring the program to South Africa, especially we're planning for the week of January 15, 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to put out a call, for applications and things like this, and hopefully we'll be able to do a chapter of Grenada Critical Muslim Studies in South Africa, in Cape Town.
So this is a different narrative altogether. It's same within the broad umbrella of decolonization, but you're looking at perhaps, shall I say, the decolonization of Islam, because you're interrogating critical perspectives, etc. Do you think it's a necessary conversation and that more South African students should be engaging with us, both Muslim and non-Muslim?
Absolutely. I think that the question of decolonization is a question that entails everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And the question of decolonization, at UNISA we do more in a broad sense, in a more general sense, decolonization. In Cape Town, the plan is to do something more specific in relation to Islam and decoloniality.
Mm-hmm.
But the space is open for everybody. You don't have to be Muslim to be part of the program.
And considering, of course, that decolonization is a narrative that includes all peoples, all particular affiliations, cultural backgrounds, religions, etc., the focus and the ideas I was speaking to Professor Nelson earlier is that it's moving just beyond tolerance, but sharing in this common humanity of each other. And the best way to share in the common humanity of each other is to know each other, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. So these are spaces, the summer schools that I organize in different parts of the world. The part of the idea is to create global networks of creating a new humanity, okay, and people knowing each other who have common interests in these questions of colonization, decolonization, and so on.
Considering that you're one of the founding fathers of this decolonial thought, I mean, you've invested a lot of time, a lot of thought, you've written much about it. Perhaps the most challenging question for many people is, what is decolonization and what do we mean then by decolonizing Islam? So can you perhaps give us some clarity on that?
Yes. Well, decolonization is not, we're not using decolonization the way it was used in the 20th century, meaning by that decolonization was basically related to a struggle for independence against a colonial administration, a colonial power. We're thinking of decolonization in a broader sense.
Mm-hmm.
That means that part of what happened is that we made a distinction between colonialism and coloniality. That is, colonialism is the colonial administration,
Right.
but coloniality are the power structures that emerge out of that history of colonialism and colonial administration. Those power structures are economic, are political, are epistemological, spiritual, it goes into aesthetics, it goes into many areas of human social existence.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the fact that colonial administration are over doesn't mean that the relations of domination, exploitation, north, south, north are over. No, they're continuing. even though formally countries are independent. The relation at epistemological level and knowledge structures, we still in a very Eurocentric world, where the knowledge of the West are the ones that prevail everywhere, including in the universities that I call them westernized universities that you find everywhere, including South Africa. So despite the fact that colonial administration are over, or apartheid is over formally, it doesn't mean that we have decolonized from the legacies of that history. We still today living under colonial structures disguised as if we were beyond colonialism. So in the struggles here for, the movement of Rose Must Fall or Feast Must Fall that are calling also to decolonize the universities, I laugh when I hear people saying, but colonialism is over. Well, depending how you think about colonialism and you define it. If you think about colonialism in a narrow way and think
in terms of administration,
about colonial administrations, then yes, it's over a long time ago. But the problem is that the structures of power that came out of that history of colonialism stay with us until today.
So considering that these structures of power stay with us, there are many who will say, but now you have a black government. How can it be that the black government is still representing the colonial power? There are these kind of binary, of very myopic narratives or viewpoints that are presented. And so people still refuse to understand, like what Mamdani speaks about, the bifurcation of power, where they made sure that the tribal leaders, etc., continued that colonial mentality, that colonial representation, that colonial administration, even after they had left. But people struggle to see that. Why do you find that they struggle to see that, or do they stop just at the color of the skin? Like, for example, in South Africa, they say, but now you have a black government. What are you talking about?
Well, you have a black government, but who rules the economy? Who rules the economy internationally? It's still the West. Who rules the economy in South Africa are still the whites. Who control the land of the country are still whites. Who control the resources? Who control the institutions? So, in a sense, we are in a so-called post-colonial colonial world.
Okay.
Because in a sense, supposedly colonialism is over, but when you look at the structures of the present, the legacy of the colonial history are still with us. This is why we distinguish between colonialism and coloniality. The structures of coloniality are still here, even though colonialism formally is over in most of the world, except Palestine, or where I'm coming from, Puerto Rico. We are still living under the classical colonial structures. But in the rest of the world, under neo-colonial structure. They are formally independent, but in reality still controlled by metropolitan centers of the West and subordinated to them. And in reality, the structures of power inside the countries are still pretty much racial ethnic hierarchies that come from the history of colonialism and haven't been overcome. I mean, look at just the universities in South Africa. I mean, look at the composition of the faculty. It's overwhelmingly white males, and controlling the structures of knowledge. And these structures haven't been decolonized. This is still very colonial. Even what they teach is very colonial, because you're reading in the curriculum, something we have discussed in this program in the past, which is the white Western males of 5 countries. That's what you read in these disciplines. What about the knowledge produced from the rest of the world? Where is that? Well, it shows you that we're still living in a colonial world, and the myth of the 20th century is to believe that because colonial administration are over, colonial relations are over, or coloniality is over. No, we haven't solved yet the problem of colonial relations. That's why we call for decoloniality or decolonization in a more broader sense. Like, we need to decolonize knowledge. We need to decolonize the economy. We need to decolonize the structures of political authority, and so on.
So in these calls of yours, I think a very prominent aspect of it, and also which was talked about a little earlier, is the whole notion of fear. Because the minute you talk about decolonizing the economy and decolonizing knowledge structures and education, etc., there is this whole narrative that is pushed to the fore. It's fear-mongering that, oh, if you want to decolonize the economy, you're going to have backward countries like all African countries. If you want to decolonize knowledge, the quality of education will collapse. And so that's why even in the fees must fall movement, I've seen this, where, oh, we support the struggle, yes, fees must fall, but the university is going to go to the dogs. So, you're going to have educators and academics fleeing and leaving the universities in abundance. You're going to get low grade, inferior grade teaching, lower standards, etc. How do you respond to these kinds of fear-mongering that has been created?
Well, I would say that decoloniality is about producing a more rigorous knowledge than what Eurocentric Westernized universities produce. If you have only as the foundation of thinking Western males of 5 countries, and you're excluding the rest of the critical thinking of humanity, what kind of provincial university is that? This is what we have. What we have right now is a very provincial and very problematic university. If you want to move beyond that, you need to bring epistemic diversity into the conversation. You need to also bring different bodies into the space so that you get different ways of looking at the world, okay? And so when we look at history, when we look at knowledge production, what decolonialism is calling for is to produce a more rigorous knowledge than the knowledge produced by the Eurocentric paradigm. Because Eurocentric paradigm is very provincial. It's only white males of 5 countries. You're based on reading Italians, French, German, British, and Americans. I mean, these are only 12% of humanity. What about the rest of humanity? Where are the thinkers, the people who have produced knowledge in the rest of humanity? This is completely outrageous when you think about it. And so they call to go in this direction and try to come with historical narrative, with theoretical concepts that are more representative of the knowledge produced in the world, more into ecologism knowledge rather than only one tradition. They call that backwardness. I mean, for me, it's the reverse. This is
progress.
This is progress. And what they have right now is backwardness. Because it cannot be that you can produce rigorous knowledge based on only one tradition of thought, the tradition of white males of 5 countries, Western males of 5 countries. This is impossible.
So, Prof, we have to go to a break. When we come back, I want to talk a little further about this, but we'll see you after the break.
بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم بمديح الهادي تنتظم ضاءت بالمختار الظلم وحلا في مولده النغم.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome to the second segment of Finding Me today in the ITV networks with my very special guest, Professor Ramon Grosfoguel, and we're here at the UNISA Summer School, Decolonial Summer School, and we're having a decolonial conversation, if I may say so. Professor, yes, so its perspective is how you see that, but I think perhaps the agents who control the knowledge structures, who control the power structures, who control the economic structures, are very good or have succeeded significantly in creating this understanding that anything less than European is inferior quality, and that if you're going to enter anything into the conversation or into the structure which is not European, you're going to basically looking for an inferior grade. And so in terms of the decolonial structure, even in terms of knowledge production, because they'll say, oh, what can black people add? What can Latin Americans add? What are you going to contribute? I mean, these were great Greek scholars, philosophers, mathematicians. So, I mean, how are you going to decolonize science, etc.? These are the kind of rhetoric, the kind of conversations that are coming through. And as a decolonial scholar, I mean, do you encounter these kinds of rigorous pushback all the time, challenging you to say that, but what you're asking for is for us to drop our standards?
Well, I call this kind of reactions where they say that anything less than a European is a problem and is inferior, epistemic racism. And so if you want to keep being racist and you want to keep having a racist society and racist epistemological structure, what I mean by that is racist structures of knowledge where you only rely on Europeans and the rest are inferior. I mean, how far have we gone into decolonization? Get the point?
Yes.
This goes back to your first question again. The decolonization is an example of how, despite the fact that formally apartheid and colonialism has been eliminated, we still today under structures of power and knowledge that are still very colonial. And so the call for decolonization is not a call for obscurantism.
And can you explain obscurantism, please?
Yeah, obscurantism, I mean like a rejection of science or rejection of knowledge or things like this. What we're trying to do is, on the contrary, to come with more rigorous and profound knowledge production than what is produced in the westernized university. For example, let me give you a few examples to get a sense. If you're going to study the problem of humanities, okay, because part of what happened in Western University is that they are dividing knowledge, fragmenting knowledge in disciplines that were formed in the 19th century by European imperial powers for their own needs of knowledge and power, okay? So all these disciplines, political science, economics, anthropology, they were all created by European powers in the 19th century precisely to produce knowledge that was self-serving to their imperial interests. So you have political science for the policies of the state. You have economics for the economic policies. You have anthropology for studying the colonial subjects in the colonies. Okay? You have geography for the geopolitical imperial designs. So you go over the discipline, they have always related to that. Now we have inherited that. We don't need to be, in the prison house of disciplines that come from the 19th century by European power interests. We should move to different structures of knowledge. Like, instead of thinking from disciplines that fragments knowledge in this way, let's think in a transdisciplinary way, beyond the disciplines, and let's discuss the problems of humanity. For example, what would a decolonial social science look like? Instead of having sociology, political science, economics departments, etc., fragmented, everything fragmented like that, where you never make sense of what's going on, okay? Because that's the purpose. They fragments everything in such a way that you never know what's going on.
You never see the full picture also.
You never get the full picture, you see? So instead of that, let's identify the problems of humanity, okay? What are the problems of humanity today? Because part of what happens is that we're dealing with the problems of disciplines. Have nothing to do with the problem of the world. So you go to these academic conferences, after 3 days you come out depressed because they're not discussing anything relevant for the world. They're just egos, big egos fighting each other and discussing problems of disciplines without any relevance to what is going on in the outside world. Any relevance for the liberation of the peoples of this planet.
So would you,
So what I'm calling for is, let's take, for example, the problems of humanity. One problem is ecological disaster created by this Western-centric civilization. Let's take the problem of the nation state as a quintessential hegemonic form of political authority that created more problems than solutions everywhere in the world. Okay, let's think about other forms of political authority that move beyond that in a way that can solve this problem instead of creating more problems. Let's think about the financial crisis. What alternative form of economies we can build beyond this historical capitalism that is a disaster for the world at large? Let's think about structures of knowledge. How can we transform the university from a westernized university into a pluriversity? Okay, not from a uni, but a pluriversity. We go over different structures, okay? We can identify the epistemic crisis of humanity today. The Eurocentrism is in terminal crisis. They cannot produce anything new. From the left of the right, the only thing they produce are global nightmares. There's nothing new coming up from there, okay? So the new things are coming from the global south and the epistemologies of the south. So once you identify problems of humanity and you begin to produce knowledge in relation to problems, next thing is bring ecologies of knowledge to every problem. Let's say we're studying the problem of ecological disaster. How can we solve this? What is the causation of this? How can we move forward? Okay, let's see how the critical thinkers of the different epistemologies of Islam have thought about this problem. Let's see the critical thinkers of the indigenous in the Americas have thought about this problem. Let's look at how the critical thinkers of Africa have thought about these problems. And then let's look about how the critical thinkers of the Western males of the 5 countries have looked at the problem, but they're not anymore the center of the conversation. They want more.
Right.
And then we put an ecology of knowledge, and then we have a broader picture and a more profound understanding of the problem, because then we get different angles here. We get to study the critical thinkers of the different traditions who have thought about the problem. Instead of reading only white males of 5 countries, let's read everybody on this question. It's just an example.
Yeah.
On the problem of political authority and nation state, okay, let's read the critical thinkers of all these traditions who have thought about this problem. You see? And then you create a really pluriversal
conversation.
Conversation.
Yeah.
And then it's not anymore the university.
Yes.
Now it's the pluriversity.
And I think what you raised significantly here is the very important distinction that the westernized university has done, and that is creating this space of an ivory tower where people sit in there and then they just, formulate these ideas without any relevance to both the local or to the society.
Absolutely.
And then they justify that based on meritocracy. In other words, merits, acceptance in academic journals, how many publications, etc. So this entire cycle is perpetuated by the system.
Absolutely. This is decadence. But then when you question decadence, then they come back and tell you, but then what you're proposing is just going to destroy the university. Yes, it's going to destroy the westernized white university the way it is now. But it's not going to destroy it for the sake of destroying it. It's going to transform it into something different and more relevant for the problems of humanity. That's the difference.
And so this is knowledge actually serving the people and not knowledge serving power, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yes.
This is knowledge at the service of the people. It's not knowledge at the service of power structure, which is what you have here. You have knowledge produced at the service of white elites here, okay, and at the service of white elites at a world scale. So white supremacy is not over. It's still with us. So that's why we need to decolonize. And I agree with this student movement in South Africa who has been calling attention to this problem. I just laugh at the ridiculous comments that they make against them, because it shows how ignorant these people from the university with PhDs are about how profound, colonial, Eurocentric, and irrelevant are the knowledges produced today in these westernized structures of knowledge.
One of the things that has come out most, I think, to the fore during the Fallist movement from these very same academics, individuals, and people of power and structures of power is that the kind of comments that you're making is producing white hate. How do you respond to that? Because they'll say you're anti-white, you're against all white people, etc.
No.
So we're at the end, and I need a very brief answer.
Well, the problem with that is that it's the world upside down. They have excluded from the knowledge structures of the westernized university everybody, and now when you call for epistemic diversity, they accuse you of being anti-white, that you're excluding them. What is this? This is a joke. And nobody's saying don't read a white intellectual. Nobody's saying that. We're saying we cannot only read white intellectuals. We have to read critical thinkers of all the traditions and of all the geographies of this planet. This is provincialism disguised as universalism. That's what they do, a provincial knowledge that do not have any kind of universal capacity, because they are inferiorizing in a racist way everybody else. And now you call for epistemic diversity and they accuse you of being anti-white. What is this? I mean, they are the ones who are racist, excluding everybody else, and when you call for diversifying the epistemic structure, then they feel that they are being you're being racist against whites.
So basically it highlights the hypocrisy in the argument of equality, where they say everybody's equal but only equal for themselves, isn't it?
Absolutely. This is a complete hypocrisy. And you need to read it as it is. It's white supremacy speaking to you.
Well, we're at the end of this particular interview, but we're going to do a second one. I think I want to leave it at that and for the viewers to consider about this whole notion of white supremacy speaking to you. We'll see you in the next interview. Fi amanillah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
قسما بالله رب العالمين وارتضينا غير دين الله دين فهو دين الحق دين الأنبياء إنه الإسلام نور وضياء.
هذا الدر وهذه الكلم بمديح الهادي تنتظم